We're going to begin today with a panel made up of three components of what we feel are instrumental in supporting women in non-traditional occupations. Our first panelist is Jerry Roberts. Mr. Roberts serves as a Director of Philanthropic and Corporate Engagement for the Midwest Urban Strategies, which is a consortium of 13 U.S. Department of Labor workforce development boards working to marry traditional workforce development processes with economic development. Our second panelist is Annie McDonald. Annie I can't say it tongue-tied today. She's the Executive Director of the American Apprenticeship Readiness Fund in Los Angeles, Orange County Building and Construction Trades Council. Our third panelist is Mallory Martindale. Ms. Martindale has nearly completed an apprenticeship from the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee, AJAC, one of our WANTO partners. We have gathered all three to have a discussion from the investor, the policy, and the worker voice perspective. Each of the panelists will give a brief introduction of their work in creating opportunities for women in non-traditional occupations. And once each of them has spoken, we'll open it up to questions and answers. So if we could begin with Jerry.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. I am really excited to be here. My name is Jerry Roberts. I am the Director of Philanthropic and Corporate Engagement at Midwest Urban Strategies. You heard from my Executive Director earlier in the program. We are a consortium of 13 urban workforce boards in the Midwest, and we are really working to marry traditional workforce and economic development strategies. So when we look at our work, and first let me back up a little bit. I have been in the workforce space for a number of years in many different capacities. First, obviously, as an employee of a large corporation, and I did that for many years before I made the jump to workforce and economic development. I spent about 12 years as a direct workforce development practitioner and working on economic development projects before I moved into the space of philanthropy, where I managed workforce development grant making, as well as program-related investments geared towards the workforce ecosystem. After about 7 or 8 years doing that work, I transitioned to Midwest Urban Strategies because the work that they're doing aligns with what I see as the goals for a more equitable economic space. We at Midwest Urban Strategies like to think of ourselves as an innovation laboratory, and we do that work through a lens of equity. So when we think about investing in programs aimed at women in non-traditional employment, we look at it through that lens of equity. And we have also had a great opportunity, whether fortunate or unfortunately, during this new age of COVID, to see that the folks that have been most impacted have been women, and specifically women of color, Black and brown women. And so when we think about how we do this and what it looks like, we are really committed to making that happen. From a funding standpoint, you will not find a lot of folks in the funding community that say that we fund specifically programs aimed at women in non-traditional occupations. But what is happening is, and where the alignment is making sure because funders, are focused right now, especially on equity, that we have a focus on equity in our workforce development work. When we talk about programs aimed at women in non-traditional employment, we're talking about equity. We're talking about everything from job quality, making sure that workplace conditions are fair and equal and safe for everyone, free from sexual harassment, free from gender discrimination, age discrimination, and that is how we make the move. I truly believe this with funders. So with my funders hat on, we have to look at what equity looks like in our communities and for those in it, In this particular instance, we're talking about women. What does that look like? How do our programs align with, say, a funder's goal to increase the number of credential attainment for underserved or disadvantaged populations? They don't say that they're funding women in non-traditional employment, but they are looking at that. And then how do we align our programming, our thinking to do that? Also, when we do that, what are we looking at as it relates to the ability to take that idea and scale it? Because we can do it for a certain population and across sectors, whether it's construction, whether it is in manufacturing. We know that we have work to do in healthcare, again, around women, across everything from entry level all the way up to the highest rungs. So funders right now are really looking at equity. I want us to think about that as we have this conversation today. And I will be here, and my contact information is on the screen, and I'm certainly happy as we go through this to hear from the other panelists and what that means to them. And then also ideas on what folks think or what folks need from the funding community in order to make sure that they are addressing women across sectors in non-traditional employment. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to being with you today.
Thank you, Jerry. That was really wonderful. And next, I'd like to move into what we're calling more the policy side of it. Only, Annie, I am so sorry for butchering your name. You know, I must have had.
I should have taken my husband's name because Rodriguez is easier to say, but it's St. Patrick's Day, so we're going to go with McMonigal.
Well, it's some really great stuff is happening in California, and in the construction side, there's a whole lot around, project labor agreements and community workforce agreements and how women fit in or don't fit in, and this whole national MC3 and how it connects to WIOA. So I had really hoped Annie would speak today, and lucky to have her. So Annie, you want to go next?
Absolutely. So good morning, everybody. I'm Anne McMonigal. I am the executive director of the longest title ever, Los Angeles and Orange County's Building and Construction Trades Council's Apprenticeship Readiness Fund. Obviously, we didn't have a marketing director when we came up with the name, but we're one of the first nonprofits that was formed by the Building Trades Council. So my board is made up of signatory contractors and signatory union representatives. And our sole purpose is to promote and sustain apprenticeship readiness programs utilizing the multi-craft core curriculum, the MC3, throughout LA and Orange County. We are the largest MC3 training entity in the country. 75% of MC3 programs are in California, and then 80% of those are ours. We are, in our state, we are an essential industry. So we are still cooking with gas in our region and have billions and billions of dollars of project labor agreements that strategically target disadvantaged communities, as well as of recent, in the last 7 to 8 years, we've actually been calling out women as a target group in that training as well, and in those policies. So we have over 12 MC3 programs in our region. We have trained in the last 2 years, although COVID kind of shut us down for a while. We've trained a little over 2,000 individuals who've graduated with certificates, and we've placed over 900 of those who are still working and retained in apprenticeship programs across 27 different trades. We even got someone in the elevator constructors who we transitioned right out of a state corrections facility. So we are working with incredibly diverse partners. We work with community-based organizations. We work with community colleges. We work with adult schools. We work with the 10 workforce development boards that are within our 2-county region. Basically, under our umbrella of the fund, we work as the construction intermediary for a region. And what does that look like? It means that we leverage everyone's resources and go after regional funding opportunities to be able to fund the most amount of training for the most amount of people throughout the region. We are a very large region, right? So nobody would commute it could take you 3 hours to get to one end of one of our counties. And so people will not do that, obviously, for free job training, but we have project labor agreements in every area of our county. So what we needed to do was set up a training that was close to the local community that can give access to that training to all of those folks without worrying about the transportation issues. And so that's why we've partnered across the board with different entities. One additional strategic thing that we've done, in particular, to increase the number of women in the trades, in addition to the MC3 alone and offering it to diverse regions of our county, we've been able, at this point, our graduates are very reflective of what our community looks like. 87% of our graduates are people of color, are Black and brown folks, and then the 17% are women. So we know 17% is not the 51% we are looking for that will match the population, but it has certainly pushed the pendulum in the right direction. So what we're doing now is we're looking at statewide and affecting statewide policies that are looking at creating statewide project labor agreements. We've been able to do that in the realm of transportation, starting with high-speed rail, which is covering the length of the state. We also have another very large transportation initiative that was funded by Senate bill and we voted on again, called SB1, and it's basically to redo all of the bridges, roads, trade and logistics infrastructure around the state from Humboldt County down to San Diego County. So it covers the length of our state. And so when we're calling out target populations for the training to lead into those jobs, because all of those jobs will be operating under project labor agreement, they will be union jobs. And so the MC3 is called out specifically in those policies. So in order to be placed on those jobs, you need to have an MC3 graduate certificate. And then in addition, women are called out in addition to veterans, disadvantaged communities, ex-offenders, justice involved are also all called out in that. So the more we're able to call the women as a population out and as a priority in these project labor agreements, the more access we have to training dollars that can help us and guide us to recruiting more women into the trades. But one of the things that I'm very excited about that we just received funding for is that the one thing we really feel like we were missing, at least in our region, and there are pots of it of different groups around the state that specialize in recruitment and outreach to women. But what we have really come to realize in our areas, we need to do a deep dive and a strategic campaign to figure out the right language for the right population and the right person giving that message. So we've identified young women still in school age, between elementary school through high school, and then women who are returning back to the workforce, single mothers, may have had other careers, maybe transitioning out of careers and industries that have been severely impacted by COVID. So we're really looking at, we've gotten some state funding so that we're going to hire and work with a campaign research firm that does a lot of stuff around political campaigns and et cetera. But we figured they would be a great entity to help us dive deep into focus groups. What language hits with folks? Should we be on TikTok? Should we be sending out mailers? Where should we be? So we really think that we're going to start delving into this work at the end of the summer, starting at the end of the summer, and take a year to really find out what that's going to be. And I really think that's going to help us in terms of increasing the number of women that we have in our programs. So I'll turn it over and then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Actually, I just want you to help clarify something too, because those of us that work in the construction industry understand what a project labor agreement is.
Oh, yes.
Or what requirements are. But because we have this national group here and we've got different sectors that are unfamiliar with that, and more importantly, the group Jerry works with in the Midwest Urban Strategies, all those workforce boards, of how do they understand if a city or a state is putting a requirement on a project, or employers and unions are trying to negotiate terms of a contract. Like, how can we as a community network be supportive or make sure that those requirements are fair and good and can be fundable for organizations like you, so it's not just setting the rules, but it's implementing and making sure whatever those rules are can be achieved.
Great. Absolutely. Apologies. So 2 things I'll just break out a little bit more. One is the multi-craft core curriculum, which is the MC3. That is a nationally recognized curriculum that was created by the North America's building trades unions. It was universally agreed upon and created by all of the research departments of all of the various trade union apprenticeship programs. And it's basically a base intro curriculum that gives an orientation to the industry, includes an OSHA 10 and a CPR certificate, but also gives a glimpse of what the reality of the industry is, and then the different trades and crafts that exist within the industry, so that individuals are not training for one apprenticeship program. In our region, we have 27 affiliated apprenticeship programs across 49 different crafts. So you can, because the way the other unions work, there's seniority, but in our industry, there is not. Construction does not have seniority. It's all about personal drive and hard work, and then the contractors will recognize you and constantly call for you. And the more that happens, the more training, the more on-the-job hours you get, and the quicker you will journey out. Every apprenticeship program is 3 to 5 years, depending on the craft. And so, again, what's gonna keep you going is to be on top of the educational portion, and then to constantly be hustling on the job site. So foremans and journeymen and contractors are like, please send her. We want her. We want her. We want her. And then that's how you continue to be successful in your career. And for you to be successful in a career that is dirty, hard, you're laying tar as a roofer in 105-degree weather, you're really, really hustling. It has to be something that you chose and that you're passionate about, not something that you found because you didn't have a high school degree that would allow you to get into all these other trades. So we work with a whole system of folks to make sure that all of the bare minimum of the educational requirements are there, so an individual can pick a program that is right for them. Secondly, all of our union work operates under a project labor agreement. The project labor agreement is a contract between a contractor and the union itself. When you're working on a very large project, it will be between the Building Trades Council that is the umbrella of all the local unions, and they will be working with, if it's a public project, the county, whatever the elected office is that is overseeing that. And in that project labor agreement, they will talk about the projections and the predictions of the numbers of each trade and each craft that will need to be on that job. And when you're doing a project labor agreement, it triggers another word that is called prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is the base wage for union apprenticeship, and it allows for a journey to apprentice ratio on a job. So just because a program's coming to your region and they say they're going to be 300 jobs because 300 jobs are called out in a project labor agreement, that does not mean 300 new openings for people. That means X number of journey electricians are going to be on that project, and then they need 4-year, 3-year, 2-year, and intro apprentices on that project. So you may only be looking at 15 new jobs out of that, depending on what the project is. So the more project labor agreements exist, the more openings are created to allow for that. And then within the language of a project labor agreement, you have local and target hire, where you can say, we want people from this community, from these zip codes, to have access to these jobs. And before we established, I've spent the last 10 years working on establishing MC3 programs throughout the state. Before that, there wasn't really a mechanism to give those community members like a pre-training to see if this is something they wanted to do. And you can understand that somebody couldn't just walk onto a job site ready to be a pipe fitter. They have no idea what a pipe fitter is. So we've created a free to anyone who is interested in the MC3, because we go for grants, and this is where funders come in. This is a free training that we offer folks. Not only is it a free training that we offer to folks, we go for additional funds to make sure that we can cover the placement costs. Because for an individual who graduates from an MC3 program, if while we're working to place them, if the painters call our organization and say we need 5 people from these zip codes starting tomorrow, if you're working with a lot of folks from disadvantaged communities, they may not have the $1,100 to get every intro painter's tool, not universal tools, not just a general tool pack from Home Depot, but painter specific tools. And then they also need to be indentured into the union, because you cannot go to work for a union contractor unless you're in the union. So you have to pay the initiation dues, have your PPE, and show up. So you can't just show up at a job site at the gate ready to go. You need to show up with all of your materials. So, and that can be quite a lift for folks. So we work to get funding to be able to cover those costs as well.
Awesome.
I addressed everything. Am I over caffeinated or under caffeinated? I can't tell.
You did really great. You did really great. And now I'd like to move on to what is always the favorite part of anything that we do on these, and that's really the worker voice. And Mallory Martindale works at AMT, the Senior Aerospace in Arlington, Washington. And Mallory, I think all of us want to figure out how we can make it easier to recruit women into these industries or fund women or whatever. So could you help us understand why you chose a career in manufacturing, and how can we help, or how can we get more women just like you to want to be in a non-traditional industry like manufacturing?
So I began my career in manufacturing by chance, really. Following high school, I was given an opportunity to work at a machine shop filing papers. I had no idea what a CNC machine was. If my high school would have provided manufacturing seminars or classes or even shop tours of local facilities, I would have started my career sooner. Becoming an apprentice has given me an opportunity to earn college credits during full-time employment, and meanwhile doubled my wage. Above all, the experience and education I gained from an apprenticeship program opened the door to leadership role I have now. I think that more women haven't had a chance to hear firsthand from women actively employed in trade jobs. I had a misconception of trade jobs being dirty and physically demanding, when that's in fact not the truth. Women are experiencing historical prejudice and stereotypes and lack of schooling on caring manufacturing techniques, and a presumption of low pay when considering a trade job. In my opinion, the most significant barrier is lack of awareness. I think that 3 things that companies or training programs could do to help more women pursue careers in manufacturing and trades would be clearly advertise pay scales for union and non-union types of work, including career tracks in manufacturing, which played a huge part in my decision to enroll as an AJAC apprentice. Also, establish mentoring programs within companies interested in increasing the amount of women in the workforce, and shop tours and seminars. Walking through Family Day at Boeing when I was younger inspired me. And I imagine an educational walkthrough of any trade could spark interest in someone.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you another question, and I'll ask some more questions. I'll get it back to Jerry and Ann as we go. But what would you see as the more significant barriers preventing women from choosing the kind of path you chose?
Well, I think the most significant barrier is lack of awareness. I think that we need more people, speaking to younger women and explaining what it's really like to work on the shop floor.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry, how about, let me go back to you for something. So what are different investors and funders thinking about in relationship to women in non-traditional jobs? I know at one time we had wanted to go after a grant for women that would go in manufacturing and construction, and one of the funders is like, why? That's not a good field for them. We don't think that's a good idea. And so has that changed over the years, or what would you say our other colleagues think about funding something like helping women get in sectors that we're talking about today?
Randy, that's a great question, and it's so true, right? I mean, historically, I've been in rooms like that, right? One of the things today, though, I think that has shifted, again, is the emphasis on equity and equality. And while folks, again, think it's just about Black and brown folks, we really do, when we think about equality, we think about our friends in the LGBTQ community, we think about women, we think about everything across the spectrum. And again, like I mentioned earlier, that is the way that funders are thinking. It's about how do we, and it's tough, right? Because some folks, some funders have made a strong stand and said, we are about equality, gender equality, all the things. And then there are others who are saying, we want to make the world a better place, right? And what does that look like? So it's up to us really to show, and this is a data-driven field, here are what the numbers look like, right? And then we can dig deeper into things like, when we talk about union space, we know that we have more equality in wages, but then when we have non-union, we know we have to start looking more at wage, income inequality and wage inequality. So I think it's about how we do that. The other thing I think too is when we frame it around not just access for everybody, including women, right, in this case, around non-traditional employment, it's about what types of supports, and I say that, that underrepresented populations might need, right? And so again, funders may look at that from a perspective of, why would they want to do that? That's not a good job for women. To now, well, how do we make sure that they have the supports that they need? So when you're looking for grant funding to maybe support, say, federal funding that you have, when you start looking at private funding, what does it look like to be able to provide the supports, right? And some of that could be as simple as being able to support infrastructure to provide the training for internal staff. So to be able to access resources to train internal staff on all things equality. It could be making sure that when we look at an industry that is 90% male, and 90% male and 90% white, how do we then look at providing infrastructure support to be able to increase those numbers for underserved populations, with a focus on women? I mean, so there's ways that we frame that, but so funders are thinking about that, and they are thinking about it in that context.
That's really awesome. I'm happy to hear that. And, as a workforce intermediary like WRTP Big Step, where it's almost like a reverse workforce development. When you look at the federal government, you're separated by, are you a youth? Are you dislocated? Are you disadvantaged? Are you, like all those different, are you a veteran? Whereas when we're in the industry, they say, what population do you want? We're like, all of them. And for an employer to partner with, 30 different agencies because they want 30 different types of women or people of color or, whatever, the intermediary then plays the role on, we'll help you reach out to the community because we're a very inclusive model, and we'll then also help community understand their person was placed, their person was trained, their person is doing well. And then that feedback loop of the employer doesn't have to call 30 agencies, the employer lets us know and we call 30 agencies to kind of feed that. How does the funders look at like intermediaries like us where, we're not really a dual customer since we're focused on the industries and people who want to be in our industries, but in many cases it's kind of a dual customer reverse model. Like, how do funders think about places like us or what Annie's talking about?
Well, Randy, as you know, intermediaries, they have a sweet spot, as I say, in the ecosystem, the workforce ecosystem. And you know that even when I was in a funding chair, right, I was supporting in some capacity some of the work that you all were doing, if you recall. And that's because you have an opportunity to do things. Intermediaries have an opportunity to do things without the restrictions of say a workforce board that has restrictions based on the type of funding they get. So to be able to fund an intermediary that is able, like WRTP Big Step, like an industry association like Midwest Urban Strategies, we're able to try and do things, right, through intermediaries, right, that we may not be able to do. So we're able to take some additional risks. And I think that is, as we start looking at how funders can be in the work, to really think about it that way.
I would just second one of the things about the funders and that we're always grateful for is when there's flexibility in the definition, which is why for us, in project labor agreements and when we're saying target hire different folks, what we're really saying, when we're able to say the zip codes in the community and name that, it means that community, the face of that community is different than the face of the city over here, but we want it reflective of the city over here. So our numbers and are all over the place for different cities. The face of the city of Los Angeles is not the same face of the city of Long Beach, where we have a larger API population. But the number of API folks that are in our programs and on the job site reflect what the city of Long Beach looks like because it reflects the community. So you're saying you're giving greater access. The other thing that we're always really encouraging of is, again, the when you don't break it down so much. So like one of the things is there's a lot of interest and should be in anti-recidivism. But we've also had bills that are so needle in a haystack with the funding that we can't get a cohort in that one little needle in a haystack, but we could do so much if the definition was broader. So it's just, and you're doing so much work trying to get your tiny group. So that's why I really think intermediaries great. We lost like 8 years ago, our state lost DOT, Department of Transportation grant, because they gave it to our state Department of Transportation agency, not our workforce agency. And our state Department of Transportation was saying things like, we need this percentage of Asian women cement masons in this county. And we're like, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that, but I can certainly give more access. So the more flexibility and because everybody does want their specific focus, that we could focus on so many people if we have a little more definition of community as opposed to different segments of community.
Absolutely. And I think one of those things that makes that successful for intermediaries is that when, again, being able to show proof of concept, right? And so to be able to receive funding to address this. I always say in the funding community, especially around private funding, is that the problems that you're trying to address at the state level were created by legislation. So so for a private funder, we're trying to work around this, hear what the restrictions are and calling it what it is. But then we also look to really looking at the workforce development boards as funding partners. In every community that we look at, right, typically the workforce board is the largest funder of workforce activities in that market. So how do you look to leverage, right, what they're doing, use that in terms of being able to co-invest funds, that they have to help bring in funds, whether it's federal dollars, whether it's private foundation dollars, corporate dollars, but looking at that workforce board as a funding partner, right, to co-write on some grants and submit those kinds of things. I think that also works brilliantly. If you can get those relationships solid with workforce boards as funding partners from an intermediary standpoint, I think that's just golden.
Yeah, I totally agree. And something that Annie said too on the boundaries, like that's what I think is the best about our organization is we don't have those kind of boundaries. It doesn't matter which side of the street you live on for us to serve you or work with you. And, and if employer is wherever, it doesn't really matter. But Jerry, you're exactly right. We want to align and leverage different resources to do what makes sense. And as Annie mentioned, with the different project labor agreements and, when I first started, 26 years ago at WRTP, they say, what's your job? I'm like, implementing common sense in a system that lost it. You can't put project labor agreements together with requirements that don't make sense. And you can't put them together with requirements that don't make sense, that don't have partners and investors that will help fulfill those kind of things. So let me go to some of the questions that we have here. And I think COVID really hit us where it really accelerated WRTP's big steps, use of technology. So being able to enroll online and attend a training or an assessment or whatever, but it really helped reach out in a different way. And we're using technology. And I think COVID hit females much harder than males in a lot of different ways. Sometimes because they're caregivers and daycare stopped and high school stopped and grade school stopped. And sometimes it was just because they lacked the skills in some of the workplaces where they had to keep the most skilled people, which weren't always the diverse people. So how have you used technology, especially recently, I guess I can go to Mallory. Did you have some technology things, or Annie, did you want to talk technology and if you've used that?
Go ahead, Mallory.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Were you able to use technology in your training or in some of the outreach? Was anything different than face-to-face for your apprenticeship?
Yes, my apprenticeship, actually, we got to use a local high school and in their shop, they actually had CNC machines. So I got some hands-on, experience, which really helped when I showed up on the work, floor. So that was a really cool key of my apprenticeship.
Awesome. And Annie, have you used technology to outreach or to recruit more people in?
We are starting to now, as you know. We still have unions that you can only fax things to. So we are still tapped to technology, but which is probably why we don't have people younger in the trades. But we are in the process of exploring all of that, and we're tackling that really head on with this new project starting this summer, because part of the platform is to have videos on TikTok that follow younger apprentices around to show what they're doing and to really access younger folks. So it has been a struggle. We did not, and our council did not believe that construction was an online training type of a program. So we did not offer our program over COVID unless it could be very socially distanced. And so we've only had a trickle of graduates, which actually has created a negative effect on our industry, because our industry didn't stop. So now that we are going back into training, we are trying to recruit through our website, through everybody's website, through schools. We're doing online outreach everywhere because our trades need first years. They missed a year of recruiting first years, and we need to keep up with our amount of work in our region, at least 3,000 new apprentices a year. And so we are really behind the 8 ball. So now is actually a great time for people to make the transition if they're interested. We've reached out to our other union partners, and we're doing virtual recruitment events. Our other union partners that have been really adversely affected by COVID, such as hospitality and the like. And we're doing recruitment to friends and families of those individuals who have been laid off and, again, affected by this. So but we need to do a better job of using technology.
Well, and so from an investment standpoint, sometimes it's very difficult to get capital investment of technology for programs like ours. As Jerry mentioned, you can, we like to target a WIOA fund to pay for the training, and, philanthropic funds to kind of fill in the missing pieces. And, but it's really hard to get an investment in capital equipment or technology types of
things. I got very creative with greenhouse gas funds to get that.
Well, and I had a teacher at our local community college basically say, Randy, is there anything you guys can do to help our students? Because we're doing a lot of this on Zoom, and we're having all these courses, and people are using their phones, and they're trying to develop and type documents on their phones. And so we looked into could we just get them a Chromebook or something so that our current apprentices could maintain distance learning or, those kinds of things. And so far they're like, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing to pay for. So I guess I'll throw this over to Jerry. Jerry, if an organization or an intermediary was trying to get more funds to increase their capacity in technology at their host organization or their training institution, or just for their apprentices or apprentice wannabes, where would you suggest we look?
Well, I would first look at the folks that are obviously funding workforce, credentialing, education, right? We have had partners that have, obviously used Zoom and Google Chat text messaging services to stay engaged with their folks. They've been able to use DocuSign, right, to get paperwork done for programs and things like that. But I think, and it really hit last spring, obviously when it hit everybody with COVID, but when we started thinking about a little different but summer youth virtual employment, right? It was like, what happens across the country to all these summer youth programs now that are doing that? Lots of things went virtual. So funders that were funding things like that realized that they had an opportunity, and they did invest in support for technology, whether it was the actual build out of virtual platforms to be able to house the programming, whether it was support for the technology, Chromebooks and mobile hotspots, things like that. And then being able to look at that and leverage what was available from community. So whether it was community grant development funds that came through COVID, in addition to philanthropic funds, to be able to find that. And again, it's about making sure you have the right kinds of partnerships. And again, with your workforce boards, there are workforce boards through our membership that we're doing virtual job fairs, drive-through job fairs, and virtual training programs, of course, across the board. So from a funding standpoint, you look to where they're already funding the work, understanding that there has to be a shift. Like everybody had to shift and adjust, but now it's not just about, and again, that goes about to an equity conversation, right? Oh, we're all just going to start working from home. well, those of us that can, that have dedicated office space like this, that have computers, that have strong Wi-Fi, right? And one of the things, again, that was talked about in some of the discussions over the last year has been around what does it look like? And so are we as intermediaries, workforce boards, the workforce ecosystem, how do we then collectively then go to a large funder and our city government and our county government and say that we need to collectively fund buses to be in neighborhoods for Wi-Fi, for our kids to have access to that for education, as well as folks to be able to go to work, do virtual training programs for our students at the tech colleges and universities that are all at home. So go to where folks are already traditionally funded workforce development, educational attainment, credentialing, those kinds of things, and make the case for why, right, we need to support. Yeah, we can't, you gave us funding last year to put people in a classroom training, right? That's not happening. But what we need the dollars for now, we can do this via Zoom, but now we need to make sure that those same folks who we're serving have the tools they need to do that. And those are computers and Wi-Fi hotspots and all of those things.
Awesome. Yeah, we just wrapped up a really cool pilot project on really focusing on people with learning disabilities and looking at ways where competencies can be measured without a paper pencil test. And so using the phone and videos, and basically they were like, I know I can do this and let me show you, and making little videos. Especially younger people, they just really latched onto that. And they had phones, but what they didn't have was access to Wi-Fi, or they didn't have, a computer to type something on. But I really would love to thank all of the panelists. You guys have done a wonderful job. I think this was a real nice kind of start of what we wanted to get at for this panel. And is there any closing comments that anybody would like to make?
I would just, sorry, Randy, there's one question about that I still see on that, that's about the high school
Go for it.
Outreach. And I'd love to hear Mallory's take on it too. I will say that we in California have been really working to change the narrative that college is the only way. And we're finally, after the last 10 years of advocating that that apprenticeship and hands-on education is as good as or better than for the right person. We have finally started changing that narrative. We have our programs in high schools, and I worked with our California Universities of California system to have our curriculum, the MC3 curriculum, go through the AP accreditation so that it actually gives advanced college placement credit for high school students, so that you can see that this hands-on technical education is not a less than way to learn AP math. It's not a less than way to learn reading and writing when you're doing proposal, mock proposals and things. And so that started to change the conversation. Also, as student, it's getting more expensive. Students are dropping out. We're just not, what we've realized that we've been finding in folks in their late 20s who are coming back who are finding us then, is they may not have dropped out and had their 10 years of not knowing what they wanted to do if they had had an educational system that was more kinesthetic and hands-on learning. They may not have gotten bored and dropped. So, it's really key that we have these conversations and we start to change. It's really been, for parents and school counselors, it's been the hardest kind of population to move and to sway. But when they start to see their friends' kids have, 6 figures worth of debt for, a literature degree, that's going to be hard. That they're like, well, maybe my son, who never grew out of really liking big trucks, maybe the operating engineers is the way he should go. So.
Cool.
Yeah,
So
I did start with manufacturing courses at college, and I could not follow through with it. It was not what I was really interested in. I wanted a hands-on job, with hands-on instruction. So I can definitely relate to that. And college was not for me, but I earned my college credits, and I have a great transcript, and I got to work at the same time. It turned out awesome for me.
How would you, sorry, Billy, no, I'm asking. How would you recruit you again?
Oh, I just, I think, I know it sounds a little old school, but I mean, posters, start talking about it. Maybe, have online web seminars, I just think that there was just such a lack of awareness when I was in high school. Nobody had approached my high school and explained what an apprenticeship was about, or that you could work and, go to school at the same time to earn college credits. I mean, I just didn't hear about it. So I think that more people need to be talking about it.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like it's one of the only trainings and schools you can go to that you don't have to pay for. Anything closing, Jerry?
No, I don't really have anything. I just know that we just want to be creative as possible when you're thinking about your funding and how it aligns, how your program aligns with the ideas of what's out there and what folks want to look at. Look at it through a lens of equity. Think about those workforce development board as funding partners. I'll certainly be going later on when we leave here into the workforce development partnership breakout session. And, again, folks can reach out to me if they have any questions.
Okay, and just as I really would love this panel, and if you wouldn't mind sharing again who you are and where you work for, and then maybe we can just put in some contact information in the chat so that if people want to reach out to you or if they have questions, they can do that.
Absolutely.
Sure. So we're putting it in the chat?
Sure. I guess that'll work perfect. And so I want to thank you again for a really great discussion. And I think we're going to move right on into the next session that we're going to be working on in today's schedule. So I'm going to just hand it off to Lindsay, and she's going to be ready to introduce our next keynote speaker.